Here in Europe, most leaders continue to stress their long-term commitment to supporting Ukraine, but increasingly there are rifts over just how far that support should go. The divisions have become even more pronounced since France's President Emmanuel Macron went out on a limb with an idea he floated earlier this month.
On the face of things, the French president and the German chancellor are aligned. Both committed pro-Europeans who also both explicitly support Ukraine. But it started to become clear they might not be getting on, related to how Europe is supporting Ukraine. Macron started talking about sending European ground troops to Ukraine. Scholz said no. Macron suggested Germany should be sending long-range Taurus missiles. Scholz was forced to say no.
Macron has put Scholz in a very difficult position. And in some ways, Scholz shouldn't have shut up, but he should have stuck to a message, and it should have been true and consistent. And because he has form for wiggling around all over the place and changing things, it doesn't look very effective once he's responding to Macron.
DW has heard speculation by some senior EU diplomats that Scholz's refusal to send the Taurus missiles to Ukraine is personal on his part, that having been pressured into sending Leopard tanks, he now wants to be seen to stand firm on something. The President and the Chancellor met in Berlin last week and were all smiles and friendship, but no public expression of change in political positions. The reality is that Germany has actually become Ukraine's second biggest supplier of military aid after the US, amounting to 17.7 billion euros. It's significantly more than that of France, which has committed 635 million euros of military aid, according to the Ukraine support tracker.
So the Ukrainians will be asking, well, Macron talks a big game, but is he willing to back that up by a significant increase in military assistance to Ukraine?
France and Germany getting along with each other is fundamental for the European Union. Not much happens unless the two can agree. And Ukraine is just one of the issues EU leaders are discussing during their Brussels summit.
Well, EU leaders are gathering in Paris today for the start of a two-day summit with Ukraine high on the agenda. With that about to kick off, let's bring in Marie Dumoulin from the European Council on Foreign Relations. She joins us from Paris. Marie, what do you make of this friction between the French and German leaders on how best to help Ukraine defend itself?
I think, as was reminded in your report, there is an overall agreement on the necessity to continue supporting Ukraine over the long term in this war and beyond this war. But there is a more and more visible disagreement on the way to do this, with Macron trying to play on what he calls strategic ambiguity, signaling Russia that the Europeans would be ready to draw all the consequences of this support and the necessity not to let Russia win, while Scholz is probably more cautious on the communication and also more cautious on not going beyond what the US are doing. And the US, as everyone knows, are currently not doing as much as they used to, which increases the divergences within the EU.
Now, Chancellor Scholz has steadfastly refused to deliver German cruise missiles to Ukraine. We know France's position on that. How is it viewed by Germany's other counterparts in the EU?
Well, there are two elements to this question. The first one is the use Ukrainians could make from long-range missiles, and there is a general consensus that this would help Ukrainians hit Russian supply lines beyond the front line, not necessarily in Russian territory, but it would contribute to basically saving Ukrainian lives. The second element is the fact that many Europeans see that the German Chancellor has been saying no to the Leopard tanks, to a variety of things, and then accepted. So I think there is an expectation that the same kind of discussion will happen on the Taurus, and that ultimately Germany will deliver these long-range missiles.
Okay. Now, as we heard in our report, France's military support for Ukraine amounts to only a fraction of what Germany is providing. Why is France not doing more?
So that's a very good question. The first thing is that the French government is contesting the figures that you quoted and contesting the figures provided by the Kiel Institute, and has provided different figures, and is also emphasizing the fact that it's not communicating about everything it is doing, and that certain things like intelligence or training cannot be expressed in figures. The second thing is probably the army model that France has built over the past 30 years, which was very much focused on projecting its military in other theaters, especially in Africa, and not so much on the defense of its territory, which was dealt with nuclear deterrence. So there are certain weapons that France basically doesn't have in its stocks because it didn't need them. The last element is the budgetary constraints. France has much more public debt than Germany, obviously, and thus much less fiscal margins than Germany. Which is also why France has been pushing on the EU inventing what it calls innovative ways of financing the support to Ukraine, because it obviously doesn't have so much fiscal margin to do that in a bilateral way.
Marie, thank you very much for talking with us today. That was Marie Dumoulin. She is the director of the Wider Europe program at the European Council on Foreign Relations. And that EU summit getting underway today, of course, is in Brussels, not Paris, as I said earlier. Thank you very much, Marie.
Thank you.